The street had been alive only moments before, filled with rushing cars, distant laughter, and the quiet urgency of people trying to get somewhere else, until a sudden impact shattered everything and left a heavy silence hanging in the air, and in that silence a woman's body hit the ground while people froze, some gasping, others stepping back, but no one moving forward, as if fear had quietly taken hold of them all, and just as hesitation threatened to turn into inaction, Daniel ran toward her without thinking, his heart pounding as he dropped to his knees beside her and called out, "Madam, can you hear me?" His hands hovering uncertainly as he struggled between helping and not making things worse, until a faint sound escaped her lips, barely there but enough to tell him she was still alive, and relief rushed through him even as fear remained, because one look at the blood on her temple and the unnatural position of her leg told him she was slipping. He quickly pulled out his phone and called for help, forcing his voice to stay steady as he gave their location while the operator instructed him to stay with her and keep her still, but even as he followed every word, the sirens felt too far away, and the weight of the moment pressed heavily on him until something shifted deep inside, something he could not explain, something that told him that what she needed would not arrive fast enough through sirens alone, and so he leaned closer and said softly, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you believe, but I cannot stand here and watch you die," and without overthinking it, Daniel closed his eyes and began to pray, his voice unpolished but real, growing stronger as he asked for her life to be preserved, for her body to be restored, for her story not to end on a cold street where no one had stopped, and as his fingers gently wrapped around hers, he felt a faint twitch, and just as he whispered, "Amen," a voice echoed it beside him, and when he opened his eyes, paramedics were already there, moving quickly, calling her back, urging her to stay, and then her body responded, her eyes opening slowly, confused but alive, and relief hit Daniel so suddenly it left him weak. When the ambulance doors closed and carried her away, a police officer stepped beside him and said quietly, "You did a good thing today," and Daniel shook his head and replied, "I just did what anyone should do," but the officer looked at him and said, "I'm not talking about the call, I'm talking about the prayer," and Daniel gave a small smile and answered, "She needed more than what I could give, so I asked the one who could give everything," and then he walked away believing it was over. 7 months later, inside a crowded church in Port St. Lucie, a woman stepped forward and said, "7 months ago, I was hit by a car," and Daniel looked up and saw her, no longer broken but standing strong, alive, radiant, and as she spoke of the darkness she had felt and the voice she had heard praying for her, his hands began to shake, and when she said, "Before that day, I didn't believe in God, but in that moment between life and death, I encountered something I could not deny," the room fell silent, and as she searched for the man who prayed for her, Daniel found himself standing before her, and when she whispered, "It was you," he nodded and said, "I was just there. God is the one who answered," but she shook her head and replied softly, "No, you don't understand. When I was slipping away, I saw you, but not like this. You were older, peaceful, certain, and you told me not to be afraid," and when she repeated, "You said, when you return, you will find the one whose faith will change everything," something deep inside Daniel shifted, because those were the same words his father had once spoken to him. What followed began quietly, with simple moments that felt almost ordinary, as Daniel and Anna sat side by side on a couch reading the Bible together, calm and at ease, soft smiles between them, her leaning slightly toward him as she listened, the warm glow of a nearby lamp wrapping around them, creating a sense of peace that felt like a foundation being built, but peace, when it is new, is often tested, and soon that calm gave way to their first disagreement, as they stood a few feet apart, tension settling into their posture, and his voice carrying frustration mixed with hurt while Daniel tried to explain calmly, his hands slightly raised as he spoke, neither of them angry, but both feeling the shift that comes when reality begins to challenge something that once felt easy, and the tension did not explode, it lingered, turning into silence, as Daniel sat alone with his head lowered while Anna stood near the window looking away, the space between them growing heavier than any argument, the room quieter, cooler, filled with everything left unsaid. And instead of letting that distance grow, Daniel made a different choice, kneeling beside the bed with his eyes closed in prayer, choosing humility over pride, while Anna sat nearby watching him, conflicted but softening, as something in the atmosphere began to shift and warmth slowly returned, and that moment led to something deeper, as they sat close again, facing each other, speaking honestly without defense, Anna's eyes slightly emotional as she opened up, and Daniel listening fully, not trying to win, only trying to understand, and in that honesty, the tension began to release, and from there, something stronger formed, as they sat side by side holding hands, eyes closed in prayer, no longer separate in their struggle but united in it, a quiet peace settling over them, not perfect, but real. That unity moved beyond words, as they began to serve together, helping others, working side by side with gentle smiles, their connection no longer just spoken but lived, their faith becoming visible in action. But growth is never without challenge, and there came a moment when Anna stood alone, thoughtful, conflicted, something pulling at her, doubt whispering again, while Daniel watched from a distance, concerned but not controlling, giving her space to choose, and in that moment, Daniel simply reached for her hand, not forcing, not demanding, and Anna chose to take it, her expression softening as she stepped back toward him, choosing not just him, but everything they had been building. And with time, that choice became something steady, as they walked side by side outside the church, no tension, no uncertainty, just quiet confidence, their steps aligned, their journey no longer fragile, but grounded in something deeper, something that continued to unfold in ways neither of them could have planned, until one day, in a quiet moment filled with certainty rather than pressure, Daniel took Anna's hand and said, "I don't have all the answers, but I know I don't want to walk this life without you." And as she looked at him, no fear, no hesitation, only peace, she nodded softly, and that simple yes became the beginning of something deeper. Time moved forward, and the same church that once held uncertainty now stood filled with joy. As Anna walked down the aisle, her steps steady, her heart at peace, her eyes finding Daniel waiting for her, calm and unwavering, and as they stood before the altar and spoke their vows, it was more than a ceremony, it was a promise built on everything they had walked through, everything they had chosen, everything they had believed in, and just beyond what could be seen but could still be felt, a quiet presence remained, steady and watchful, as if Daniel's father stood there in spirit, not distant but near, witnessing the moment with calm approval, a reminder that some connections are never truly lost. Years later, that same church welcomed them again, but this time not as two, but as a family, Daniel holding their baby boy, Anna holding their baby girl, twins born into a story that had once nearly ended before it began, and as the pastor gently poured water over each child, dedicating them in faith, Anna's eyes filled with tears, not of fear but of understanding, because she now saw clearly that the night she almost lost her life had not been an ending, but the beginning of everything that had led her here, and she leaned closer to Daniel and whispered softly, "Look at what God has done," and Daniel, steady and grateful, replied, "This is what faith becomes when you don't walk away." Days later, under a calm open sky and a golden sunset that softened everything it touched, Daniel and Anna walked side by side once more, Daniel holding their baby boy securely in his arms, Anna holding their baby girl close to her chest, their steps steady and unhurried, their journey no longer defined by fear or doubt, but by something deeper, something lasting, something that had carried them from a broken moment on a silent street to a life filled with purpose and peace. And as they walked, Anna looked ahead and then gently toward Daniel and said, "I thought that night took everything from me, but it gave me everything I needed." And Daniel met her gaze and replied, "Sometimes what feels like the end is where God begins." And as they continued forward into the fading light, there was no doubt left, only peace, because some prayers are not answered all at once, they unfold over time, shaping lives, restoring faith, and leading hearts exactly where they were always meant to be.